Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tim Garrard and I'm the Partnerships Lead for the Music Teachers Association, or the MTA. And on behalf of the MTA, I'd like to welcome you to the second webinar in a series looking at choral opportunities at university. The experience of singing in a university choir is for many one of the privileges of a lifetime. And in order to showcase this opportunity to as many pupils as possible, within this series, we are speaking with representatives from various universities and colleges in order to find out all about their institutions, their choirs, the typical profile of the singers in their choirs, and the various procedures for making an application in the first place. Last week, MTA member James Day chatted with representatives from York, Durham, Oxford, and Princeton, highlighting the difference between UK and US applications. In this choral singing webinar 2, we will focus in on 3 universities in the UK, namely King's College London, Oxford University, and the University of Cambridge. As such, I'm thrilled to be joined by Joseph Fort, Director of the Chapel Choir at King's College London, Daniel Hyde, Director of Music at King's College Cambridge, Sarah MacDonald, Director of Music at Selwyn College Cambridge, Robert Quinney, Director of Music at New College Oxford, and Ben Nicholas, Director of Music at Merton College, Oxford. The plan for this afternoon is for me to ask our panel a series of questions, after which I'll open questions to the floor. So if you have a question for our panel, please do write a message in the chat function. You'll need to log into or create a Google account in order to do this. I think it's the case that for each of our directors of music today, the members of your choirs have typically won a choral award in order to sing with you. So to kick things off, what exactly is a choral award, and what are you looking for in a potential choral award holder? Ben.
So a choral award is a kind of status within the choir at Merton. It's somebody who has a passion for singing, an enthusiasm to sing in a college choir, which is essentially singing sacred music, although not exclusively. And the award itself is a fairly modest amount of money. It's an honorarium. But perhaps more importantly, it's the singing lessons, which are offered throughout the academic year. It's the meals, which are offered after choral services, and it's a subsidy for tours and so on, the kind of other experiences which make up a choral scholarship. In terms of what we're looking for potential, because inevitably the candidates that come forward for audition are coming from any number of different backgrounds. Some will have sung in youth choirs, some in churches, some in cathedrals, some in schools. And we're looking for somebody who is eager and enthusiastic to fulfill their potential during their time at university.
Thank you, Ben. Sarah, would you say that there's any difference in Cambridge then? What exactly is a choral award, and do you look for anything else in a potential choral award holder?
Choral award holder is exactly the same thing in Cambridge. It's somebody who wants to sing and wants to learn, somebody who's committed to doing something at a high level, but learning while they're doing it. In terms of what we're looking for, it's much the same, really. Musical understanding, a little bit of it, even if you haven't had a lot of choral experience. If you play an instrument, we can teach you how to sing and that sort of thing. And it's certainly, it's very much a status thing rather than a sort of major financial award. But it's also something that teaches you a lot of transferable skills, including, discipline and responsibility and all of those sorts of things that you learn by being a member of a team that works together. And actually, it's interesting, employers are often very interested, much more interested in what you've done as a choral scholar than maybe what you did in your biology degree or whatever.
Sure, thank you. Joseph, it's probably very similar at King's College London, but do you have anything else you want to add?
Yes, very similar. I'd just say probably less food and a little bit more money. That's probably the distinction. So our choral scholarships carry about £700, but we don't have the tradition of meals after that so many of the Oxford and Cambridge choirs do. And as with others, we our choral scholarships also carry with them free singing tuition with our choir singing teacher Bertie Rice, and also through King's link with the Royal Academy of Music. That's where a lot of our students have their instrumental and vocal lessons.
Fantastic. And what about the potential? What are you looking for in a potential award holder?
Somebody who will be quick in the choir and a quick study, if even if they don't necessarily already have a huge amount of singing experience. And I think you just see one example of that. Quite often we have people who might play the French horn or the clarinet or the violin, and have a lot of orchestral experience or some other area of music, a lot of experience in that, but perhaps not too much singing, perhaps have hardly had any singing lessons before, but we know that, that they've shown their potential, and we know that will make a good fit and actually add something totally new to their musical experience.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. There are over 150 higher education institutions in the UK. In relation to those represented on today's panel, there are around 40 institutions in London and approaching 20 member institutions of the University of London, of which King's College London is one. Oxford and Cambridge have collegiate structures in which students belong to both the university and their specific college. Oxford has 38 colleges and Cambridge 31, I think. So my question is, do all universities and colleges offer choral awards? Joseph, do you want to carry on?
And the answer is no, but a number do. For example, within the University of London, Royal Holloway also has choral awards in addition to us, and a lot of the other universities within the University of London also have choirs, and albeit not with awards. Imperial College, for example, has a great music program going as well.
Thank you. Robert, welcome. Do you want to take this question on behalf of Oxford and Cambridge, the collegiate system?
Sure. Yeah, so within Oxford and Cambridge, there's a huge amount of variety as to the kinds of choirs and the sorts of choral awards that they offer. So there are colleges that have a choir where the audition process is quite light touch, and they're perhaps not singing very often, so you might not need to have any prior experience whatsoever. There are other choirs where we're singing every day, more or less during university term, like New College Choir or like King's or St John's in Cambridge. So there we're looking for people to bring some skills, that fast study kind of skill. It's not to say that everybody has to be a kind of finished article, but it's a different kind of process. Within those colleges, the choir has a very high profile, and we've been doing it for a long time. New College has been doing it since 1379, as it happens. And there's all kinds of variety in between those as well. So, and another feature, of course, is that some choirs, like the choir at New College that I direct, has a top line of choristers, of children, and others are entirely made up of the student body. So there are all kinds of different things there between those two extremes.
Thank you. The process for applying for a choral award at various universities seems to me always to change, or at least slightly from year to year. So I wonder, what are the exact procedures for application as things stand for your choirs, including, if you may, an application timeline? Daniel.
So at Cambridge, application to a choir is dependent really upon application to the university and receiving a conditional offer of a place. So whilst directors of music, I think all my colleagues probably do very similar to what I do, we hear people year round. Anybody who wants to come and give an informal audition and seek advice, they can turn up and make an appointment any time in the year. But the UCAS deadline in October then feeds into academic interviews in December. And once people are in receipt of a conditional academic offer, they're then able to apply to the Choral Awards scheme, and auditions for that take place in March. And it's usually the case that one would be applying for a choral scholarship at the same college that one has the offer for. However, that's not always the case, and indeed it's not necessarily a rule that members of King's College Choir have to be members of King's College, for example. So there's really a sort of parallel process, but the academic process comes first, and then the choral process happens. And of course, once the choral process is done, if you've secured a choral scholarship in your college where you also have an offer, then you go through to A levels and results, and we see how all of that goes. But sometimes people don't secure scholarships in their chosen college, and they might get an offer from another college. So there are multiple routes in, and then once we've had A-level results, there may be some gaps, and at that point we might appoint people just through private audition who may be coming to the university or might already be here, and they might come and join the choir during the summer, essentially, to start the following October. But to the second question of what's specifically a timeline, I think it's really a case of doing everything year round. Whilst there are deadlines and there are specific interview dates, those people who are interested can always come and have an informal look and seek informal advice at any time.
Thank you. And so just to recap, what it seems to me with Cambridge is that people are welcome to come and sing to Directs in Music at any time, but then it's a case of applying through UCAS by the October deadline to a college, going for interview, and upon being successful at interview and gaining an academic offer to the university, one would then apply for the Choral Awards in the February for the March Awards.
Yes, although Sarah may correct me because your uncertainty, Mr. Garrard, is laced with my own. So I think that is...
Excellent. Good. Joseph, how about at King's? What is the process for application and the timeline?
So at King's, everything fits with the general UCAS process. So by January, I think is normally the deadline for your UCAS application, or around then, and that's when we would suggest that you got in touch with us. I won't talk about it too much because we've got all the details on the choir website, but that is a good time to get in touch with us and say that you would like to audition for the choir. I then do auditions on various weekdays over the following 2 months, over February to March. Is now a good time to talk about what the audition entails? I can't remember. Yes, it is. Briefing.
Go for it.
So one short piece of your choice, one little bit of sight reading that's typically some polyphony, some ear tests, and some range tests. So those auditions happen in February to March. By the end of March, I try and let everybody know so that when you put your you finalize your choice of university for UCAS, you know whether you're doing that with an offer of a choral scholarship. One other thing to say though is that every year, a few people turn up in September and say, "Oh, do you have space for a tenor?" And we always try and accommodate that. So it's absolutely not set in stone. That is the process, but every year we sort of do everything we can to work around it as well.
Thank you, Joe. So turning now to Ben, Oxford does things slightly differently, doesn't it, in terms of the timeline? And so it'd be excellent to find out the procedure, the timeline, and also, given that you have a different timeline, given the COVID-19 pandemic, you're doing things slightly differently this coming year. But of course, there will be people on this call that will be doing it in future years. So a bit about what would normally happen and what you are going to be doing this time round.
Okay, so the normal situation is that the choral scholarship audition takes place in September, prior to putting in a UCAS form. The deadline is the 1st of September, and you have the option to ask to be considered by a number of different colleges, and you can put them in order of preference. Your first choice college will then host you for 2 days in about the 3rd week of September. And during that time, you'll have a central audition at which your first choice college will take the audition, but other colleges can come to that and hear you. And you may also have time to sing to another college, a chance to be interviewed or at least have a conversation with the chaplain and the director of music and so on. And at the end of that process, you get one of 3 different letters which come out from the music faculty. Letter 1 says, please put in your UCAS form to your first choice college. They would like to take your choral application further. So please now put in the UCAS form. The second letter is one that says your first choice college does not wish to retain an interest in you chorally, but another college would like to, and please feel free to apply to that college. And the third letter says you've been unsuccessful for a choral award, but please, that doesn't stop you from applying to Oxford anyway. And then you put in the UCAS form by the 15th of October. And then once the academic results are known in January, your choral place is then confirmed, should that be what's happening. Now, things are different this year, and we've just agreed that the auditions will take place in a different format, partly on Zoom and partly by submitting a videoed recording. So there will be further guidance on the university website very soon about this, and indeed details of how to make that recording. But you'll be asked to record your prepared piece and send that in. It can be accompanied or unaccompanied. If you don't have an accompanist, then the university will do its best to supply you with an accompaniment. And then the live part of the audition will take place over Zoom, and that will include some sight reading. It will also include singing a couple of verses of a folk song, so that you actually do something that you can prepare in advance. And again, details of those folk songs will be on the website very soon. And it will also include a chance to have a conversation with the director of music and so on. So I hope that sums up what's happening this year.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Dan, coming back to you, lots of that will be similar in terms of what happens in a Cambridge audition. Is there anything else you want to add in terms of what happens at a Cambridge audition? And a further question, what do you look for in an audition piece?
I think we all have our own format for auditions, but there will always be some form of musicianship test. So the sight reading and the oral skills. I might sometimes stretch a very capable candidate and ask them to do some dictation with an oral test, see if they can write something down, work out how the score would look. But that's only really in the heat of the moment if somebody's exhausted on my other test. I need something else. As to the other question, in an audition piece, I think it's very easy to overthink this. I think if one is applying for a choral scholarship, one should sing something which is really in the muscles, it's really in the body and in the voice, and is therefore something that you can really perform. I think it's important to remember that coming to a place like Cambridge can feel quite intimidating if for the first time you're given the opportunity to sing a solo piece in a big college chapel with people listening to you and assessing you. I think you need to feel as comfortable as you can. I always advise people to sing in a foreign language if they know the language well. I think it's perhaps more helpful for us if we hear an English song in the first instance, and perhaps as a second piece we might hear something in another language. And I think that doesn't restrict the option of repertoire, but I think it reflects the likely activity that one would do as a choral scholar if one were to come up.
Very helpful, thank you. But does it matter whether it's sacred or secular, or does it matter the style of the piece?
Doesn't matter at all. Again, I come back to the point about you should be entirely comfortable. I've even had S Club 7 in an audition, which wasn't wholly out of place, but it certainly gave me something to work on. And then, of course, in the audition, I could do, as Robert and Ben were saying, I could determine somebody's potential far more easily because they were comfortable with the medium.
Thank you very much. Now, Not all the singers watching this webinar will be at schools necessarily with a tradition of this type of choral singing. So with that in mind, what are your tips for preparing for one of these auditions? Sarah?
First of all, not to worry, but if there is a choir that you can join at your school, then do join it. Or find a community choir or a church choir. Even if you're not a Christian, just going along and singing and getting used to doing some of that sort of stuff. As I mentioned at the beginning, instrumental lessons are really useful. So if you played the clarinet until you're 7 and then sort of gave up but now you're actually interested again, take up the clarinet again and make sure that you're keeping your musical skills up, even if you haven't got the opportunity to do high level singing skills, because that can be taught, as your voice settles later anyway. But certainly, speak to the head of music at your school if there is one, and if there isn't, then see if you can find out from the senior leadership team at your school if there are some teachers who know, who might teach chemistry or whatever, but who actually know a bit about music and might have a friend who might be able to give you a little bit of coaching. And obviously, there would be a cost associated with that, but certainly joining a church choir would be free, and joining a community choir would be free, and maybe the local youth choir if there's one nearby. Do a little bit of looking online at what the opportunities are where you are.
Fantastic, thank you. So to recap, in terms of preparation for the audition, any music making is a good thing. So if you have an instrument and you're studying that, that's a very good thing. Look at the resource within your school, see if there are any members of staff that can help you prepare. Look outside in terms of church choirs, which would be a really good regular, potentially weekly source of singing choral music. Youth choirs, regional choirs, community choirs, national choirs like the National Youth Orchestra. There are courses such as the Rodolphus choral courses that happen in some of the holiday periods. All of these things are a really good thing. Many pupils will sing in choirs but won't have singing lessons. Do you recommend that potential choral award holders have singing lessons if at all possible, or does that not matter? Robert?
Not necessarily. It might be worth seeing a teacher for a kind of consultation, but to see what they think your potential is. But even then, I think we are really keen to hear anybody who's interested in doing this. And I mean, another point to make, is that if you have any questions about any of this kind of thing, or are seeking any advice about how you might develop as a singer, you can always get in touch with us, with those of us who are going to be doing the auditioning. But yeah, as for regular singing lessons, well, there are lots of really good singing teachers out there. There are also some singing teachers who might not be terribly helpful in preparing you for exactly the kind of thing that we're doing. It's very difficult to kind of, and I hate to kind of make any sort of blanket judgment about that, because there's a lot of wonderful singing teaching that goes on. Better, I would think, to focus on choral experience, because there are fantastic choirs all over the country, in different sorts of choirs, but doing really good work, and you will sing well and develop your potential within those choirs, I think, rather than putting all your eggs in the basket of individual singing lessons. That would be my kind of instinct about it. We work in our colleges with singing teachers who are really important. I mean, at New College, we have a wonderful teacher, Bronwyn Mills, who teaches all of the choral scholars and all of the choristers, and she has the dubious pleasure of teaching me once a week and the other organists. So we have an absolutely kind of wraparound system there, which is incredibly helpful to me as the director of the choir. So once you come to us, you're very, very well looked after, but none of that is based on any necessary prior singing tuition.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Daniel has already touched upon this, but your choirs sing services within the Anglican church tradition. So do your singers need to be practicing Christians? Joseph?
No, and to stress this, we've had members of various faiths singing in the choir, and I think the only all that's asked is that that everybody in the choir, whether they're practicing Christian or not, respects the tradition of the service. And we actually also sing. We don't just sing an Anglican. So once a year we sing, because King's has various chaplaincies, the Jewish chaplaincy and an Orthodox chaplaincy and a Muslim chaplaincy, and so we also sing an Orthodox Vespers service that is a fascinating sort of foray into that particular tradition as well.
Thank you. Moving on to a slightly different tack and talking about the academic requirements for entry at your respective institutions. What bearing does a Choral Award application have on a pupil's academic application to the university? Sarah, could you talk to us about that?
Absolutely none. It's tangentially related if you're planning to read music. If you want to apply to study music, then it's of interest that you are interested in choral music and maybe have some experience in that, because it is a bit related to the course. But because the way the program, the way the process works at Cambridge is that you make an academic application first, in a sense, apart from the fact that you might mention at the very bottom of your personal statement that although you're completely passionate about classical archaeology or whatever it is you're applying for, by the way, I like to sing. That's just, and I planted some trees in the rainforest during my gap year, or whatever. Those are completely random extracurricular activities which are not relevant to your application academically. As I say, except for those applying to read music, because then you could actually argue that your music lessons and your singing lessons and your piano lessons, whatever, are actually related to the curriculum that you're going to study as your degree. But otherwise, it has no bearing on it at all.
Thank you. Ben, in terms of Oxford, same question. What bearing does a Choral Award application have on a pupil's academic application? And a further question, if I may, are there any restrictions, any subjects that you can't study if you want to be a choral scholar? For example, subjects that require lots of lab time.
So there's no bearing whatsoever, just as at Cambridge. And although the choral process happens in advance of the academic process, the tutors will not know if you're in for a Choral Award. That's certainly the case at Merton. There's no discussion whatsoever. And I also reflect that tutors have said to me that the UCAS forms where the personal statement includes some information about a candidate's musical kind of potential and education is sometimes beneficial, in the sense that a tutor thinks that if you're spending a certain number of hours practicing each week, then you've got the ability to be focused and dedicated. And they see a correlation between that and the academic work. So, talking about your music in the personal statement, of course, is useful, but it bears no relation on the choral application.
Excellent. And what about any restrictions of any courses?
There aren't any restrictions. In fact, Robert and I have just been talking about this on another webinar earlier today. I think both Robert and I know of cases of people studying any subject, including medicine, and holding a Choral Award at Merton or at New College. So we know it's possible, but I think the critical thing is that you're organised and you are prepared to move pretty quickly from the lab to the choir stalls at the end of the day, and you can plan your work around the singing and vice versa.
Thank you. Daniel, any restrictions at Cambridge? And another question, if I may, any subjects you would recommend to apply to read?
I think there are a few restrictions in different colleges, depending on whether colleges have fellows, tutors in those subjects. And the way to find out that information is to look on the website, because that information will be up to date. And if you're at all unsure about that and you're thinking of a specific college, then I would recommend contacting an admissions tutor, because they will give you up-to-date information. I would, just before answering the other question, I would just add to the points already made that it's not that we don't care about the Choral Award in the admissions process. Of course we do. but we're looking for people who would have the skills to manage both commitments. And of course, we would not want somebody to come up to a choral scholarship and then really struggle academically and find that that has an impact on them in a myriad of different ways. So really, it's something that's so important to us that we want to know you can cope with the pressures of both. As to the question of specific subjects that one might apply for, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to name actual subjects, but perhaps one might think in different areas. For example, the humanities subjects, traditionally they lecture in the morning and they teach in the afternoons. And so if you're thinking of a choir such as King's College, which sings seven services a week, 5 or 6 days of the week, you might want to consider whether or not you would be able to manage that level of commitment alongside a big scientific subject. I've said all of that, but I have actually 3 scientists in the choir at the moment who all do extremely well, so it comes back to time management. But it may be worth thinking about the variety within an area, such as the sciences or the humanities. And perhaps there are subjects which exist here at Cambridge that are not subjects one does at A-level. So that's another way to approach the consideration of what you choose to apply for, because there may be some weird and wonderful things which are closely aligned to an A-level subject, but it may take that in a different direction, and that might be new to you, so it's well worth investigating.
Thanks, Daniel. And Joseph, how about at King's College London?
There are no restrictions for subjects. We've had students from all sorts of things, including medicine and science subjects. And nursing, I particularly like nursing students tend to have the best excuses for reasons for being late to rehearsal. It's hard to argue with someone who's just been cleaning things from the inside of their shoe and that sort of thing. The one thing to mention is that across many of the University of London universities, there's a sort of agreement not to schedule teaching on Wednesday afternoons. So a lot of extracurricular, not just music, a lot of extracurricular activities happen then, that enables people from to sing in choirs or to play on a sports team or whatever.
Thank you. Now, all of your choirs are exceptionally good, but of course, no 2 choirs are the same. Can you describe the weekly commitments of a singer in your choir or a choir similar to yours? And aside from the weekly services, what else do your singers get up to? Are there any concerts, recordings, tours, for example? Joe, should we carry on with you?
Sure, yes. So in our choir, everything's contained within the week itself, because on Sundays, the building is largely empty. We're not a campus university, we're in a city. And so we have Monday, 5 o'clock till 6:30 rehearsal. Tuesday evening is evensong with a short rehearsal just before. Wednesday afternoon is sung Eucharist and followed by another rehearsal. So all of our things are contained in these first 3 days of the week, which also means I think that people can focus on their the small matter of their degree or other things and do the choir as one of several things they'll be doing. And it means that we can do various concerts here and there later in the week, and people can sing in other churches if they want to on a Sunday. Yes, one of the things that I think is, I think maybe 2 things that the choir does in addition to the services are our recordings, and our tours, and we really try and make the recordings interesting projects and the tours sort of interesting projects and interesting destinations. So while we often go to the States or various European countries, we've also quite recently been to Nigeria, for example, which we believe they told us was the first time that a British choir had been to Nigeria since another choir with Kings in its name went there in 1972. And so we try and sort of these, I think the projects that we do are also trying to be intellectually stimulating as well as in addition to the kind of performative element.
Thank you. Ben, over to you. Merton and similar choirs with similar commitments in Oxford. What are your weekly commitments? What did you get up to other than during those services, concerts, recording tours, etc.?
So firstly, I think the choirs that have a similar commitment to Merton in Oxford are the choir of the Queen's College, which sings 3 services, just as we do, choir at Keble College, which also sings 3 services, and the choir at Worcester College, which actually I think by and large sings 4 services a week, but it's a similar setup. So we sing on a Sunday, a Tuesday, and a Thursday. We rehearse before each of those services. We also have a rehearsal on a Monday lunchtime. So the regular commitment, and it's a commitment we stick to pretty rigidly during term, is meeting 4 times a week with services on the Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And then because the vacations are so long, we do use a few days in each vac for some choir activity. And I know that the singers love coming back to Oxford, staying in Merton and being based here, and having some time in Oxford without the pressures of term. So I know that that's something they enjoy very much. So we will often give a concert in Oxford and perhaps in the UK at one of our college livings. We use the time for some touring, so we probably go abroad most years, and we'd also make a recording perhaps once or twice a year. And again, the chapel is used by many groups for recording. It's a great space to sing in, and so we play that to our advantage.
Thank you. Sarah, how about Selwyn?
Well, Selwyn's commitment is very like Merton, actually. There's a sort of group of colleges in Cambridge and Oxford which sing evensong, well, basically Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. So we can never, ever hear each other's choirs sing, historically how it's always been. So we also have, as well as Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, with a rehearsal followed by a service, we have a rehearsal on Wednesday as well. And we, again, like Ben, we stick to that pretty rigidly in term time so that people can work their academic commitments around knowing exactly when choir is during term. And then outside of term, we would usually do between 4 and 5 weeks across the year with a tour, a recording or 2, and some concerts, and Christmas extra services and that sort of thing. And again, just like Ben said, that's something the choir always really enjoys. Those times are called choir week. The choir loves coming back, and they're basically, apart from some conference guests, maybe they're the only ones in college, and the staff and fellas, come and hear them sing in rehearsals and are very, proud of what they're doing, and they don't have the worry of essays and exams and stuff, so they can really just think about singing, which those times are always good fun. I've missed them a lot this term, actually.
Yeah, I bet. Thank you. So we've heard about choirs that have roughly 3 or 4 services a week. Daniel, sticking with Cambridge, you have already mentioned that the Choir of Kings, like the Choir of John's, for example, has 7 services a week. Is your commitment term time only?
No, so we sing on 6 days a week in term time, but then our activity outside of the 8-week university term is pretty high. So usually we have a brief European hop somewhere in September before university starts, usually a 3 or 4 day tour. And then in December, we stay up in Cambridge and we spend 5 days filming carols and then Easter, 2 television programs from King's. And we might, depending on how the diary shakes down, we might then do a little European hop, or we stay home, and we usually have a big concert at the Barbican in London before our broadcast on Christmas Eve. So if you were to join the Choir of Kings, you'd stay all the way through until Christmas. And as Sarah and Ben were saying, it's great fun. There's a great familial atmosphere. And I think St John's is the same, the other similar choir here in Cambridge. Then in the Easter vacation, we tend to have a festival here at King's in the week of Easter itself. And there may be a European or indeed a transatlantic tour at that point as well. But usually that is passed over in favour of people being able to stay and do their academic work. And our main big tour usually happens in the summer. So last year we spent 3 weeks in Australia. before COVID came along, we were actually going to be jetting off in 2 weeks' time for 3 weeks in China. Make of that what you will. But that will probably happen again next year because, of course, China is already waking up to start making arrangements. So there's usually a big summer tour to end the year. And then recordings happen in and amongst everything else. And other little odds and ends which crop up as individual things.
Thank you. When looking to sing in a choir in London or Oxford or Cambridge, how do you know which choir is right for you? How does a singer find a best fit? Sarah?
Well, the easy and objective answer to that is you need to think about what subject you want to study, because you're going to be spending 60 or 80 hours a week doing that. So once you've chosen your subject, well, maybe not quite that many, some people do, some people don't. Once you've chosen your subject, you then need to think purely objectively about how many hours a week you are willing to commit to singing as an extracurricular activity. So if you're reading a subject that doesn't require a huge amount and you want to sing 7 days a week, then you can make that decision. If you want to read a subject, like veterinary medicine or something that takes a lot of time, there will be some colleges that won't allow you to sing in their choirs. And so you want to look at the colleges that will allow you, that have a time that you can balance, between your studies. And once you've kind of made the decision about I want to sing 7 services a week, or I want to sing 3 services a week, or indeed I want to sing 1 service a week, you can narrow the colleges down into groups. And then you can look at the colleges that fit into the group that you've decided you'd like to sing in. And beyond that are more subjective things. Do you get on with the director of music, for example? Do you really not like Victorian Gothic architecture, so you definitely don't want to apply to Selwyn? Or do you actually want to have a long cycle ride between lectures and college every day, so that makes a difference about where your college is? Happy Canada Day, by the way, to relations. Those are sort of more practical decisions. You're always welcome to come up and listen to the choirs sing and get a sense of what they do, and meet the director. And beyond that, there's once you've made a decision about how many hours a week you want to do, we're not that different from each other, I don't think.
No. Thank you, Sarah. Robert, does one of you want to answer the question on how a singer finds
choose the right college for you?
Finds a best fit? Yeah.
Well, I think finding out as much information as you can in advance is a good idea. And I often say to people who come to sing to me, have you been anywhere else in Oxford? Spend a bit of time this afternoon just walking around the colleges, because they are very different places, and you get a sense of their character, I think, just by walking through the front door. And it's worth really thinking about which place feels right to you, and also where you might be happy to go as a second or even third choice, because the way that the cookie crumbles, it can be quite unpredictable. It's a figure of speech. The way that things work out, it may or may not go with your first choice. So have a think about that eventuality as well. As we've all said all the way through this, we're always very happy to hear from people and to answer inquiries. At New College, we have a thing where people can come up individually and sing with the choir for a service, and then go into hall with the clerks and find out from the horse's mouth, another figure of speech, what there aren't actually horses singing in the choir, but find out what it's actually like. And you won't always be absolutely certain of these things, but as much information as you can gather in advance will help.
Thank you. Brilliant. Now, Daniel has already mentioned this, but there are occasions in which members of some of your choirs are not members of your college or even your university, for that matter. How does singing in a choir that isn't your college's work? Joseph, King's College London.
Yes, we do occasionally have students from other nearby universities singing with us, for instance, UCL or the LSE. And it really just comes down to timetabling, and if we can make that work, we will. I imagine this is different in Oxford and Cambridge. For us, we have to we give in the audition period, we give priority to students at King's, but it normally works out that if there's a space and the right person to fill that space, we can make it work for somebody from a different university to sing with us.
Thank you. Benjamin, we've looking at Oxford. You've spoken of the process and the Choral Awards, and then putting down your first choice college and then receiving your letter advising you to apply through UCAS to that college. What happens if I really want to sing at one college, but I want to read history at another?
If you know that from the starting point, i.e. the beginning of September, then you might want to go and sing informally to the director of music at the college you know you want to sing at, but you would not be able to go through the Choral Award scheme. So you would need to apply through UCAS, and once you know your outcome in January, that would be the point to get in touch with the director of music and say, I've been accepted to the university. Can I confirm my intention to audition for your choir?
Sure.
So I'd let them know in advance that it's a possibility, but you certainly won't be able to do it through the Choral Award scheme, because the point of the Choral Award scheme is to align you with the college at which you might sing and you might study.
Thank you. And Sarah, similarly in Cambridge, I've got my academic offer from College X in January, but actually I want to sing at Selwyn College, Cambridge. So what do I do?
It's the same at Oxford. If you the way the choral scheme works is that you can only apply for a choral award at the college at which you hold an offer. So if you end up at College X, but you don't want to sing in College X's choir, then what you would do is send me an email separately and say, I'd like to audition for Selwyn instead. And probably what I would do at that point to say, that's fine, if you have your heart set on it, but I wouldn't hear you until after the process had gone through, the people who actually were applying as members of Selwyn. Generally speaking, though, there's a lot of movement, even at the end of October, at the beginning of term, where people do still, most of us still have vacancies in our choirs at that point, especially if people have missed their grades. Even if we filled up the choir in the March trials, we'll still find that people aren't actually arriving. So it's good to just keep in touch with people, with directors of music, because it doesn't matter if you're at a different college, you can still sing. If you get in, you can still sing in another college choir.
Thank you. Now, a number of former choral award holders have gone on to enjoy distinguished careers as internationally renowned concert and or opera singers. And so my question now is, do all choral award holders go on or aspire to going on to singing careers? Robert?
Certainly not. And to reprise something that I think Sarah said earlier on, being a choral scholar gives you all kinds of what we call transferable skills, notably organisation, but also kind of the ability to perform under a certain amount of pressure and to work with other people. So there are all kinds of things to, recommend it for, let's say, future employers. But it is a fantastic training for anybody who wants to go into the musical profession. Not just as a performer, but all the different things that you can end up doing. There are quite a lot of people who are currently in arts admin who have started off singing in choirs, because you get a sense in a college choir of what it takes to put things on, to arrange performances, and sometimes even also the financial side of things. We have a number of very distinguished alumni from New College Choir. We've got a load of really good tenors: Toby Spence, Daniel Norman, Nick Pritchard, Guy Cutting, loads of people who are all very busy and successful. And I think all of those, I mean, we're talking there in 3 of those cases about very prominent opera singers for whom singing in the choir was absolutely the right thing to do for their developing voices. And so that's something to bear in mind about a choral award. All of us are very aware that you coming to us are in development, you know, and students are all growing and developing and getting better over their 3 years. So we're looking for people who have that potential to really go somewhere. So it's unpredictable as to whether people will end up as performing musicians, involved in the musical world in other ways, or doing something completely different. But I think by that process of development over the 3 years or even 4 years in some cases that you spend in a choir, you'll learn all kinds of things, you know, one way or another.
Sure. I think it's worth saying at this point that a very, very long time ago, I was a choral scholar. And within my year group, two of my fellow choral scholars are now in law. They're lawyers. One works for a firm of architects. One is a civil servant in Whitehall. And I'm a teacher. So lots of varied professions that we've gone on to. A gap year. Let's talk about gap years. A gap year is still an intriguing option for some pupils. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of taking a gap year before a choral scholarship? And if it's a good idea to take a gap year, what are good choral scholarship gap years? Daniel.
I think that depending on what you choose to do during the gap year, it can be an extremely valuable experience. I think there's a lot to be said for having a year out from school before coming up to a place like Cambridge or Oxford, or indeed going to be a student in London. What you might do is consider going and singing in a choral scholarship, a one-year placement, either in a cathedral choir or indeed in other areas of music making. Some people go and work in a different school where they can run musical ensembles, they can run school choirs, they can gain experience before coming up to a place like Cambridge. And the benefits are that often people know or have a much broader sense of the repertoire. So when juggling a big choral commitment along with academic requirements here in Cambridge, that kind of makes it easier, really. I think the tendency has been in recent years perhaps to not take a gap year because of the costs involved. And there are ways to try and alleviate some of that financial burden. Indeed, some pay or house or do a mixture of both for their students. And if it is possible, I would strongly recommend it, because I think people come up with a little bit more experience, and indeed they've got over the hurdle of being away from home. Those sorts of transition points, which of course are rites of passage and are very important.
Sure. Sarah, do you have any advice on particularly good choral scholarship gap years?
The only thing just before I answer that I'd add to Dan is there are some subjects that are less keen on gap years than others. And if you're, I think maths in particular, if you're interested in applying for mathematics, you're usually advised not to take a gap year, because I think you might forget how to add up. I'm not quite sure what the reasoning is, but it's something like that. So just check that before you launch on your gap year plans. I know certainly that for all other academic subjects, that what they want to see, also as Dan was saying, is they want to see that you're going to use your gap year wisely, you know, and do something constructive with it, and not just kind of catch up on Netflix or something. In terms of places to, not that any of us has any Netflix catching up to do over we've finished it now, haven't we, over the past few months. In terms of places to do a choral scholarship, there are a number of cathedrals, and the ones I know of off the top of my head: Portsmouth, Truro, Hereford, and a number of London churches, I think, that will do, if you did something else during the week, but you could sing on Sundays. So that's definitely not an exhaustive list, but if you want to do some singing every day of the week in your gap year, then those would be the places to look.
Daniel, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think Sarah's absolutely right about certain subjects, and it also prompts me to think that when I was applying 20 years ago, people would have been applying for gap years, and it would have been quite normal for tutors to start awarding places 2 years into the future. I think that is less likely now. So take, for example, if you were to apply this December 2020, I think it is less likely that somebody will give a place for October 22. They're more likely to want to give their places for 21. So if you really are keen on a gap year, it's probably worth talking to the director of music where you want to apply and considering a post A level application so that you're considered in a 1 year cycle rather than a two. I think that's right to my colleague.
They seem to be nodding.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Excellent. Now, there may be some music teachers, or hopefully there are some music teachers as well as pupils watching this broadcast. In your experience of 18-year-old singers joining you for their undergraduate years fresh from school, is there any one thing that you would like to ask school choir directors to focus on more within their delivery of a choral singing education? I'm going to ask each person on the panel for an answer. So I'm starting with Robert.
Oh, thanks for starting with me. I suppose it means that the answers won't be used up, at least. Yes, to do as much as you can, and I know this is asking quite a lot, as much as you can to nurture individual voices and not fit developing voices into voice parts that might not be suitable for them, but that you need somebody to sing in your choir. I think that's really hard because, you know, most choral music's in 4 parts and you want people to be able to, supply all of those parts. But there can be a certain amount of kind of 1 step forward, 2 steps back for young voices if they spend, in the case of a young male voice that has not recently, there's only recently changed, if that's stuck in a particular pigeonhole vocally, you must sing, whatever, that can't be all that, that can be quite unhealthy for it. So as much as possible to nurture those individual voices, rather than just looking for people who'll fit into a kind of choral matrix, difficult though that is.
Thank you. Joseph.
I guess I would say sight reading, just on the basis that every year there will be not a huge number, but 1 or 2 people who are absolutely brilliant musically, have great voices, and are just sort of so alive when they sing. But when we get to the sight reading bit of the audition, they're just through no fault of their own, they're just not they just don't do very much of it, and therefore couldn't hold their own in a piece of polyphony or something. And for that reason, I can't take them because I know that they won't have a good time essentially in the choir, because they wouldn't be able to keep up. And I mean, there are things that we can do. They can join another choir for a year and then come back and audition for us later. But that's the one thing that does come up occasionally as something that you really, really wish that person had developed a little more in.
Sure, thank you. Sarah, they may have stolen your ideas, but do you have anything to add?
Yes, I mean, they have stolen my ideas. Robert in particular, that's utterly brilliant. There's so much good music these days being written for what are called cambiata voices. So go and find it and do it. I think mine is probably it's probably showing my generation or something, but to add on to those musical things, I would like to see school children being encouraged to commit to something, even, in the proverbial wet week in February and you're feeling a bit crap, you still need to go to choir practice. And actually understanding that when you commit to something at the beginning of the year, you need to see it through, and you need to know that there are going to be times that are difficult. You don't want to do your piano practice or whatever, but you still actually need to, and you need to push through those times when those things are difficult in order to enjoy what happens at the end of the year when you get good at something, or at the end of 3 years when you're actually a really, really fine choral singer. And I know from my own experience, seeing choral scholars who decide actually this isn't really for me, I get really disappointed, not just because I'm losing them musically, but because I realize how good they could be, and they're never going to do that. on the other side, the ones who come to me and say, oh, I don't know that I should be doing this. And then I convince them to stay. And at the end of their degree, they look up and they say, I can't believe I almost thought of leaving. This was the best thing about my experience in Cambridge, full stop. But you've got to have, and you've got to nurture and teach school kids and children to actually commit to something even through the difficult times. Because in order to do something well, you've got to be able to sustain it for a long period of time. And singing in a choir, there is a commitment involved.
Absolutely, and on behalf of school teachers, I think we would all agree wholeheartedly with that. We're rapidly running out of time, but Daniel or Benjamin, do you have anything that you want to say very quickly?
I would say that all those things, in addition to that, perhaps just increasing and encouraging as broad a musical outlook as possible with the technology that is available now. If one's working on one's sight reading, Spotify, CPDL, you can get scores, you can hear the sound world. There are so many resources available that one can use for personal study, and I would really encourage that.
Thank you. Ben, the last word.
Yeah, we've heard 4 brilliant answers. I think I'd just add to what Joe was saying that I'd really encourage your choirs to sometimes have to look at a piece for just a few minutes and make something of it. So it's kind of carrying on the idea of developing the sight reading. There's lots of polyphony that's not complicated, some of it in 3 parts. Again, you can choose a pitch that suits the choir. And I think just being thrown in and being encouraged to make something of it as a group is a really useful skill. That's not to say that I think sight reading is the be all and end all, because increasingly I want everyone to have the music so inside them that this idea of running by the seat of your pants all the time is not something that I particularly want. But again, it's about building up those musical skills to cope with a piece of music in just a short space of time.
Perfect. Well, that concludes this afternoon's Music Teachers Association webinar. My sincere thanks to our brilliant panel for their time and words of wisdom. And thank you, our audience, for joining us. A reminder that this will now be available on YouTube, should you ever wish to access any of it again. And please do forward the link to anyone who might benefit from this afternoon's discussion. So thank you once again, and goodbye.